Hello, everyone. I'm Madalene Mielke, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. I am thrilled to welcome you to the second annual APAICS Energy Summit. I'd like to thank our summit partners, Amazon, American Petroleum Institute, BP, Delta Airlines, Edison International, Toyota, Walmart, and Waymo, as well as all of our special guest speakers, panelists, and moderators. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected office. The Energy Summit brings together community and corporate leaders, subject matter experts, and elected officials for bipartisan policy discussions that affect our communities and the nation at large. Today, we'll hear discussions on AA and NHPI representation in the energy sector, challenges and opportunities with energy transition, the future of mobility and transportation, as well as the potential effects of new energy legislation and what our partners are doing to adapt to changing conditions. First, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Vanessa Chan. Dr. Chan is the Chief Commercialization Officer for the Department of Energy and Director of the Office of Technology Transitions. In this role, she is responsible for all commercialization activities across DOE. She is currently on a leave of absence from her position as undergraduate chair of the Material Science and Engineering Department at the University of Pennsylvania's School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Dr. Chan was the first woman and the first East Asian elected partner in McKinsey's North American Chemicals practice. Let's welcome Dr. Chan to the APAICS Energy Summit.
I want to start by saying thank you to the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies and their corporate partners for the opportunity to inspire this important AAPI community. The mission of APAICS is close to my heart, as is the focus of the summit. Although my schedule didn't allow for me to attend in person for my remarks, I will be there at the reception later tonight and look forward to meeting many of you. I'm here to talk to you in my role as a Chief Commercialization Officer and the Director of the Office of Technology Transitions, or OTT, for the U.S. Department of Energy. Our mission is to increase the private sector uptake of clean energy technologies and to expand the public and commercial impact of the Department of Energy's research, development, demonstration, deployment portfolio, including the national labs. I'm also an East Asian American innovator, educator, investor, entrepreneur, and a widowed mom of 2 teenagers who, like many of you, has had to fight my way through challenges and overcome barriers to climb the career ladder. Funnily enough, it was never on my vision board to become a public servant. And when the Biden administration reached out, I was a little confused since I never operated in the circle before. After earning my PhD in Material Science and Engineering from MIT, I spent 13 years helping very large public companies bring their technologies to market as a partner at McKinsey & Company, whereas the very first East Asian and very first woman elected partner in McKinsey's North America chemical practice. From there, I started a consumer products company and successfully launched my own technology innovation to the marketplace, even selling live on QVC. And during that journey, also became an angel investor to help other small companies commercialize their technologies. I'm currently on leave from the University of Pennsylvania, where as the undergraduate chair of the Material Science and Engineering Department, and also the first AAPI to hold the undergraduate chair position, I'm revamping how we train engineers so that they are not just deep technically, but also have the entrepreneurial skill set needed to bring technologies to market. In 2021, I answered President Biden's call to lead the Office of Technology Transitions and Commercialization for the DOE. My mission is to drive private sector uptake of clean energy technologies. On paper, my career seems unusual. McKinsey partner to QVC, to startup advisor, to university professor, to presidential appointee. But my exposure to these very different sandboxes gives me a chance to connect players across a diverse set of ecosystems to drive us to a clean energy transition. We're at a pivotal moment, both for our society and our planet. We face challenges of epic magnitude, and many of them evolve around energy. Well, epic problems call for epic solutions, and this is a catalytic time to drive change. In the past year, President Biden worked with Congress to enact 3 monumental laws: the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. These life-giving legislative wins have delivered the structure, strength, and fuel we need to revitalize our economy and build clean, sustainable, and just energy systems. Together, these 3 laws represent the largest investment in clean energy in our country's history. With this legislative trifecta, the US has marshaled roughly $500 billion additional dollars to transform energy. We know that communities of color, including API communities, have disproportionately borne the economic and environmental burdens of our current energy system, while reaping few of the benefits. We have an incredible opportunity to achieve our climate goals while building in environmental justice, creating quality jobs, and ramping up domestic manufacturing and global supply chains, and achieving net zero carbon emission by 2050. API communities and individuals are playing a key role in transforming that system through our contributions in various fields, from science and technology to education, politics, and economics. I'm proud to serve in the Biden administration, which more than any other administration in American history has lifted API representation in federal government. In fact, 15% of Biden's political appointees identify as API, a historic number. We've made gains, but our community still has a lot more to offer in public service and leadership. All of this is to say, we can't get it done without talented folks like you. We need API public servants, scientists, engineers, community organizers, visionaries, strategists, and policymakers. We need people with passion, bright minds, and big ideas. If we want to not only serve the next 100 years, but to also thrive, the public and private sectors must join forces in the fight for a sustainable world. Thank you for listening, for showing up, and as fellow AAPI stepping up to blow past the barriers placed down in front of us and to serve in the public sphere on the solutions that will support our nation's shift to a new energy paradigm, one that's secure, sustainable, and equitable. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Senator Brian Schatz. Senator Schatz chairs the Indian Affairs Committee and serves on the Appropriations Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Select Committee on Ethics. He also serves on the Senate Democratic Caucus's leadership team as Chief Deputy Whip. Prior to his service in Congress, Senator Schatz was Hawaii's Lieutenant Governor and served for 8 years in the Hawaii State House of Representatives. Let's give a warm welcome to Senator Schatz.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. In the face of long odds, we enacted the biggest climate action in history. The Inflation Reduction Act sets us on a path to cut emissions by 40% by the end of the decade, putting us within reach of our Paris Agreement target. It represents a new way of legislating on climate. We prioritized reducing emissions above all else. We figured out what policies actually get us to our climate goals and work from there. It also prioritizes communities that have been hurt by pollution and overlooked for clean energy investment in the past, including Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian communities. Not just in the unprecedented $60 billion that we invested in environmental justice, but in areas such as the tax code, where this had never been a consideration. Through tax credits for solar energy and battery storage, rebates for low-income home electrification, and grants to tackle air pollution, we put historically unseen and underserved communities first. We established bonus credits for clean energy in neighborhoods near fossil fuel plants. We created incentives for solar energy in multifamily affordable housing and for community projects where renters might not be able to go to solar themselves. And we made the first of its kind $25 million investment in Native Hawaiian climate resilience and unlocked $20 billion of new loan authority for tribal energy projects. Instead of pushing money through Wall Street and hoping it trickles down, we're taking direct bottom-up climate action because the communities harmed by pollution deserve to benefit from this clean energy revolution. And they deserve investment so that we can undo decades of injustices. Thank you and have a great event.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Congresswoman Doris Matsui. Since 2005, Congresswoman Matsui has represented the 6th District of California, encompassing the city of Sacramento and the surrounding areas. As a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, she serves on the Health, Environment and Climate Change and Consumer Protection and Commerce subcommittees and is the vice chair on the Communications and Technology subcommittee. As the co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional High-Tech Caucus, she advocates for policies to expand the innovative use of technology across every sector of the economy. She also is an ardent supporter of advancing STEM education, especially for women and girls. Let's welcome Congresswoman Matsui to the APAICS Energy Summit.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to join all of you today at the APAICS Energy Summit. Thank you, Madalene, and everyone at APAICS for inviting me to speak today. As all of you know well, an aggressive climate agenda is no longer an ambitious goal. It is truly a necessity. From wildfires and hurricanes to severe flooding and record heat waves, across the nation we are seeing firsthand the devastating consequences of climate change. As co-chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, my colleagues and I realize that there is no cure-all here. This is going to take a full systems approach to battle back against the climate crisis. That's why I'm thrilled to join you today to discuss how the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is pushing our country down a cleaner, more sustainable path. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, alongside the Inflation Reduction Act, are absolutely transformational investments in our future. We are accelerating our energy innovation. We are providing the tools we need to secure our clean energy supply chain, build on our existing clean electricity generation, and make sure we have a resilient, modern grid moving forward. It's no secret. Transportation and energy are the two most polluting sectors across the nation. And that's why the IIJA addresses both. It makes a $7.5 billion investment in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It has $5 billion for the adoption of electric and hybrid school buses, and it creates programs to develop the next generation of battery technology and support battery manufacturing here in America. It authorizes $500 million to fund energy efficiency and EV buses at K-12 schools through my bill, the Healthier and Greener Schools Act. It also includes provisions of my Power On Act, a law establishing a $5 billion program to strengthen electrical grid resilience during extreme weather events. This is a huge transformational piece of legislation, and what I've talked about is only scratching the surface of what we will achieve. Through this bill, we're looking at all the avenues available to create a clean energy future, to ensure clean air for our families and create healthier, more resilient communities. Those of us here know better than anyone that the narrative put forward seems to illustrate that Asian Americans are a community with uniform issues and access to resources. But we know better. The AAPI community is really a much more complex tapestry of subgroups and rich cultures that also includes substantial disparities that really must be addressed. And that's why, as we fight against stereotypes in all forms, we are also making sure that our climate and clean energy solutions incorporate the diverse voices within our community. And that's why I've been working hard to ensure that my colleagues and I prioritize environmental justice as a central pillar of our discussions. As the Biden administration rolls out many of these programs and investments, it is imperative that we remain focused on policies that will accelerate our clean energy transition and build a greener, more sustainable future. We all know that the window of opportunity will not stay open forever. Climate change is happening. It's already had dire consequences. And what we do today is really about our children, our grandchildren, and the future generations. Now, I want to thank everyone at APAICS for inviting me to speak today on this really important topic. And please enjoy the panel. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your remarks. It is a great honor to hear from such esteemed speakers. Our first panel of the APAICS Energy Summit is New Energy Legislation, a step forward in securing America's energy future. The Biden administration has signed multiple pieces of legislation in the past 2 years meant to spur energy innovation and deployment, including a pathway to achieve the administration's goal of a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035. This panel will explore the impact of recent legislation on the energy industry, and specifically how the administration plans to implement its vision, the potential impact on AA and NHPI communities, and obstacles and opportunities for the industry, as well as everyday Americans. I'd like to introduce the panel moderator, Bruce Tsuchida. Bruce is the principal at the Brattle Group and specializes in the analysis of wholesale electric markets and modeling. His experience spans a wide range of utility consulting projects, including the analysis of operations for power markets, ranging from integration studies for intermittent resources such as wind and solar power, ancillary service studies, operational logic studies, and analyses required for regulatory proceedings. Let's give a warm welcome to Bruce and our first group of panelists.
Thank you, Madalene, for the introduction. My name is Bruce Tsuchida, and I'm a principal at the Brattle Group, as was introduced. Before I introduce the two panelists today, Choi from Edison International and Deron Lovaas from the Natural Resources Defense Council, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the IRA so that the audience in general understands what we're going to be talking about. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was passed by Congress in August this year, and it allocates about $1.5 trillion to fund many of the sectors in the U.S. economy. Predominantly, the amount of money goes into the electric sector, where there's tax benefits for renewables, there's hydrogen, nuclear, and carbon sequestration capturing technologies, and there's transportation and customer electrification along with energy efficiency. It also goes into healthcare, domestic businesses, for example, supporting the U.S. manufacturing or prevailing wages, and it also adjusts the tax code. But with that, today, I think we're going to be talking about transportation and the electricity industry. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to the two panelists in alphabetical order. First, we have Choi, the Senior VP of Corporate Affairs at Edison International. She's a Senior VP at Southern California Edison and Edison International, so she wears two hats. And she's been active in national policy and community engagement and serves as the board of the Smart Energy Power Alliance, which is a nationwide organization that supports the implementation and deployment of clean energy and distributed resources and the technologies associated with them. She also chairs the board of VELOS, which is a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the shift to electricity transportation through public-private collaboration and public engagement. So you can see how she is very, very suited and fitted for this conversation. The next panelist that I have is Deron Lovaas from the Natural Resources Defense Council. He's the senior policy analyst, and he spent his entire life going through all this policy stuff. Before he joined NRDC, he was at the National Wildlife Federation, Zero Population Growth, and the Sierra Club. But at NRDC for the past 1 year, he's been closely monitoring public policy pertaining to building the environment, and he currently oversees advocacies for efforts related to energy efficiency, housing, smart growth, and transportation. He was previously the director at NRDC for federal transportation policy, and also the chief strategist for advancing bipartisan oil savings legislation, and he reviewed the nation's transportation laws. So he got a real policy wonk on the other hand. With that said, let me throw it over to Caroline and see if I missed anything in terms of the introduction for the IRA or for yourself.
No, not at all. Thanks, and glad to be here.
Deron?
No, that's all great, and it's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let's start with transportation because I think that's the easier topic for everyone to join on to. So, Deron, give us a little bit of thoughts on what you think the IRA is going to do to the transportation sector.
Yeah, so the Inflation Reduction Act is a historic piece of legislation. And for transportation, what's interesting is that it is a bookend to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law enacted about a year ago on November 15th of 2021. And that law invested more than $660 billion in surface transportation purposes. And that includes $108 billion for public transportation, the largest investment ever, as well as the largest investment ever in electric vehicle infrastructure at $7.5 billion. And states across the country are required to come up with plans as part of this national electric vehicle infrastructure program. They've submitted the plans, they've been approved, so they're ready to go. And just in time, the Inflation Reduction Act comes in with $36.2 billion worth of additional investments in clean vehicles, including numerous tax credits and grants, both for consumers and manufacturer conversion, as well as for the U.S. Postal Service to clean up its fleet, and for heavy-duty vehicle conversion too. So this is a 1-2 punch policy-wise that is set to transform the nation's surface transportation fleet to be cleaner and more efficient.
And when you say cleaner and more efficient, you're basically talking about electric vehicles. Is that correct? Or does it include other technologies?
It does include other technologies. Electric vehicles are probably the most competitive option for consumers and manufacturers, but there's a possibility of moving to hydrogen as well. There's a funding for advanced biofuels in here too. So there's liquid alternatives to petroleum-based products. So there's a number of technologies that will be advanced here in order to clean up the vehicle fleet.
But today, those infrastructures for, let's say, hydrogen or biogas or whatever alternative fuels you mentioned do not exist, or do they?
Largely, they don't exist, and this is where electrification, frankly, has a leg up on these other technologies. We have a grid. Granted, it needs to be upgraded substantially, and it needs to be, I'm sure Caroline will talk about this, there's a lot of improvements that need to be made to it if we really want to move the transportation sector over to electricity for our vehicle miles of travel. And that infrastructure is already built out, so it has an advantage, definitely.
So, Caroline, what do you think all this transportation change, including electrification, or maybe it doesn't go to electrification, it requires building new hydrogen or biogas facilities that will probably use electricity as well. What do you think that would do to the utility industry in general?
Well, we're excited about the opportunities for electrification, both through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, so Bill and IRA. Both, I think, have great opportunities for the customers as well as for the electric utility industry. And as Deron said, we, I think, are well positioned because the electric system is ubiquitous. That said, there are a lot of investments that will be necessary to really ensure that the companies are able to meet the electric demand that is expected through these two laws, both on the transportation side as well as on the building side. So more heat pumps and heating and hot water, all those things too. So between the two, it's a substantial increase in electric load that's forecast from these two laws. It will really move the needle in terms of greenhouse gas reductions as well as clean air. We're very excited about that too, given that in Southern California, we have, I think, maybe the worst air quality in the country. So it's an area that we are not proud to lead on, and looking forward to opportunities to clean up transportation in order to really get at the air quality as well as the climate benefits. Let me talk just real quickly on what we see is what is needed by the electric utilities, because Deron's right, there's a lot that has to happen. Planning is one. We have to really modernize our planning processes, not just at the utility, but at the state level and with our partner, the customers who are adopting electrification. So we really need to make sure that we're building into our plans this accelerated electrification so that we are making the investments in the system where it's going to be needed, where we forecast the need to be, and have the resources available to get there. And then it's also in just the technology, because technology is advancing rapidly across all sectors of the economy, and the electric utility industry is not an exception to that. So more digitalization, more technologies that really get at the distribution level, the grid, to help with automation and help our customers really be able to adopt those technologies like electric vehicles at scale. And we also don't see it all being electric. So we do see hydrogen and biofuels being part of the solution, both in the transportation sector as well as in hard to electrify industrial sectors. To your point, we think that the creation of those fuels may also use a lot of electricity. Hydrogen, the cleanest way to make that hydrogen is hydrolysis. And so that does take a lot of electricity. But the path that California is on in particular, and we see other states going this direction as well, and in going towards more clean energy. So California is on a path to get to 100% clean energy, using that clean energy to fuel vehicles, to make hydrogen. It becomes a great circular economy in that way.
So I heard that there's a lot of investment needed from you, Caroline. And as a individual electricity customer, that feels like my rate's going to go up. Do you have any thoughts on how that's going to impact the rates? And also, I understand that California was already trying to get to 100% clean by 2045. Is this new IRA going to change that path, or is it just going to bolster it? Or what changes do you see from the path that you planned before the IRA came out and after?
Yeah, so let me start with that question, and then I can go to the cost. So I think the IRA helps California stay on track. So the goals, as you said, is 100% clean energy by 2045, net neutrality by 2045. And the IRA and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law both help the state to achieve those goals, both with federal dollars for infrastructure like charging stations, as well as the incentives that go to customers to help facilitate the adoption of these technologies, whether electric vehicles or heat pumps or electric hot water heating, those types of things. So it's a twofer in terms of having both dollars to help government and cities and customers and utilities get more infrastructure in the ground, as well as having the adoption of that technology. So I think it helps California stay on track to meet those targets that we've set for ourselves, which are very ambitious, and we're excited about them. Our analysis shows that for California to achieve its ambitious even 2030 target, which is necessary to achieve the 2045 target, while we have been really successful in California and had an average of about 1% emissions reduction a year over the last several years, which has been accompanied by economic growth. So having growth and still getting emission reductions is quite an achievement. We have to quadruple that rate of emission reduction. So we need to get it like 4%, a little over 4% emission reduction every year between now and 2030 to hit the targets that we set for ourselves of 40% below 1990 levels. And the federal legislation, these new laws will help with that as well, along with the state budget was substantial. We had a substantial surplus the last couple of years, and the governor and the legislature put a lot of money behind the climate priorities that the state has set for itself. So between those two, I think we do have a chance of being able to achieve those targets, but it's going to take a lot of work. To your point about the cost, it is true that customers' electric bills may increase as they adopt more electric technologies like vehicles and other technologies in the home. That said, we see the energy share of wallet in total going down because they won't be spending on gasoline and natural gas. So we do see that while the electric bill may increase, the total share of energy wallet for expenses in a home should decrease as we move towards this clean energy economy. And the greater electrification puts downward pressure on the rates that people pay in the state. So that's another benefit of moving towards more electrification as well. So we have this path that we're on. It's going to be a challenge. And we recognize that, for instance, the Utilities Commission here in the state of California and pretty much every state, they focus it on the electric bill. They're not responsible for gasoline prices. They're not, and so having that view of energy share of wallet is difficult at times within the state. It's something that the state is looking at as they look at how to ensure that the transition to a clean energy economy is equitable and affordable, and that we are keeping the customers who have been traditionally underrepresented in the game and helping them to make this transition with everyone else, with programs and dollars to make that transition affordable.
So before I fling over to Deron, is it true that in California, at least, the amount of, let's say, greenhouse gas or whatever other emissions there may be that the utility industry, electric power utility industry emits is a lot less than what the transportation industry emits today?
It is. The transportation sector today is the leading sector for our greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It's about 40% of the emissions within the state. And if you add the refining, it increases to over 50%. And so getting at zero emission transportation is really critical for the state to achieve its long-term climate goals. See Deron nodding, so I think I got those numbers right.
Yes, so Deron, let's flow it to you. Caroline talked about the challenges that the electric utilities will face. What do you think about the challenges that other industry sectors, including the transportation sector, which is it's not one single company like the electric utility is, but what do you think the challenges are there?
Yeah, happy to speak to that, although I did want to say that we do have an analytical team, and they took a look at just the $100 billion in clean electricity tax incentives in the IRA and found that cumulatively U.S. households would actually save money as the cost of renewable alternatives drop. So they would save about $60 billion cumulatively over the next 15 years, is what our numbers tell us. And for both buildings, electricity consuming end users, basically, as well as for vehicles, something that we shouldn't overlook is efficiency and the moderation of demand that's possible thanks to the investments and the policies in both of these bills, both of which will push out more efficient vehicles into the marketplace and help to convert the fleet so it consumes less fuel and saves consumers money. And the same is true with our building stock. There's a lot of funding in here to retrofit housing, for example, which will end up saving consumers money in addition to the lower cost of renewables over time. So those are the advantages of some of the shifts. Now, for transportation, some of the challenges have to do with, as the sector is a complicated sector. And converting the light duty vehicle fleet is important, but so is the heavy duty vehicle fleet. And then there are parts of the sector that are harder to convert. What do we do about maritime uses of fuel? What do we do about aviation, right? So substitutes are harder to come by there. And that those parts of the sector are likely to lag in terms of achieving the clean energy and climate goals that we have as a nation. And in terms of nationally, the picture is similar to the one Caroline painted for California. Transportation is the leading sector in terms of carbon emissions, which is actually relatively new. I've been working in this area, as you mentioned, for a long time, and it's only been in the past decade that the lines have crossed and transportation now exceeds power or buildings in terms of the sector most responsible for carbon emissions.
So what is the incentive for, let's say, an individual user to buy electric vehicles or transition to electric vehicles, given the demographics of car ownership today is changing? Like when you and I were growing up, we always wanted a car, and the first car that you got after high school was like a good memory within yourself, and you tinkered with it and you did all sorts of things. Some of them may be stupid, but you did all sorts of things. The newer generation is now thinking, I don't need a car. So how's that going to impact going into the future? Is there going to be fewer cars and it's going to be shared, and thereby the energy infrastructure change needs are further limited? Or is that actually going to increase the volatility of the needs, because you can't really measure how much you need at any given time? And would that actually lead to a higher, let's say, investment needs because of the uncertainty? Let's start with you, Deron.
Wow, that is a tough question. So first, in terms of
Glad you're first, Deron.
in terms of what is in these laws, the good news is there are a lot of tax credits for consumers. So there's thousands of dollars of tax credits for buying a new electric vehicle, and there's also thousands of dollars worth of incentive tax credits to buy a used car, right? That's electric. And actually, that second one, I believe, is the first policy wise, which is very helpful because it'll help to transform the used car market as well. There's no getting around the fact that if we're to achieve our climate goals, vehicle miles of travel will have to decline. And that's going to be a challenge. And it implies that there will be fewer cars out there, right? And not right now we have a huge car fleet. It actually outnumbers the people in the United States. I think more households own 2 cars than own no cars, right? So transitioning to a world in which that is less necessary, and where younger people especially, because you're right, I think millennials and kids like my 15-year-old daughter, who will be looking at a license next year, are less interested in car ownership, right? And how do we make sure that our communities can accommodate that, and that we're prepared for that kind of future, right? With lower vehicle miles of travel, especially per capita, and fewer vehicles.
Caroline?
Yeah, I'll just add to that we certainly see how, I mean, as you are well aware, car culture in California is, almost part of the identity of the state of California. So it really is interesting to see how younger people are less interested in getting in a car and definitely love the whole rideshare opportunity. And I think that can work in some places in California and other more metropolitan areas, but recognize that you have a huge swath of the country where rideshare really is less of an option. And so why would people get into an electric vehicle? I think it's some of the things that Deron talked about with the incentives that are available to make those vehicles more affordable. Also, the availability of vehicles. So you just have a lot more models that meet different types of needs. And so that can help people to go into an electric vehicle that they may not have chosen to do in the past. I mean, you have the F-150 Lightning, for instance. So now you've got a pickup truck, a really, with a waiting list for people to get into, and also helps with their resiliency at home, as you've seen them be able to charge appliances if there's an outage, or fire up the grill if they're off-roading and that sort of thing. So it's pretty incredible vehicle. That you have SUVs now coming that are all electric or hybrids. And so I think just the model choices are ones that help people choose to go electric. I also think, because I think a lot of people don't go electric because of the environment. It's not a driver for a lot of buyers. And so it's the experience, it's the fun of driving. And again, you're seeing more models of cars that relate to different ideas that people have in terms of the kind of car that they want to drive. So that's another, I think, reason. We also have additional programs. So the state of California has an incentive to help people get into electric vehicles. And then the utility, for example. So we have a rebate. In fact, I think might have been the model for why the feds moved forward with a pre-owned vehicle rebate. We have one as well. And so we give $1,000 rebate to customers who buy or lease a pre-owned vehicle, and it's up to $4,000 for certain income levels. And that is not just for the first time that vehicle is purchased, but it goes to 3 times. So that same vehicle can be purchased 3 times as a pre-owned vehicle and customers get that credit. So I think there are lots of opportunities to help customers adopt EVs. The federal tax credits are really generous and help with that. But I also think it's things like the models that are available, the experience of driving, and of course the environment, which is another driver for many people like myself. But I know that doesn't appeal to everyone.
Yeah, I'm old school, so when you talk about fun of driving, I still enjoy the stick shift, and I'm thinking the stick shift is just going to go away if everything goes electricity.
Yeah,
So
I miss the stick shift. And if I could just add one thing here, I want to just be clear that in terms of vehicle miles of travel and car ownership, it would be a big shift if there were moderation of demand and if more people owned one car versus two cars or three cars, right? So we're not talking about shifting to households with 0 cars, right? And this is part of the reason Caroline's right. It's not just the environment that motivates people in terms of car buying. Cars are expensive to own and maintain over time, right? And that's something consumers are going to be looking at too. And if we can find ways for people to be able to live and thrive without having to own 2, 3, 4 vehicles, but instead just own one. I think that's part of the planning we need to do for the future.
So Deron, you brought up planning, and Caroline, I'm going to swing it back to you. The utilities would oftentimes have something called the integrated resource planning that they've had for the last, 50 years. They tend to look at 10, 20 years ahead, try to figure out how many transmission wires to build, how much generation plants to put in. But on the distribution side, the planning is typically done maybe 2, 3 years in advance, but oftentimes at a shorter time frame. How are you going to change that planning process when you're seeing this huge surge of electric vehicles, which will connect to the distribution network, not the transmission network, but the distribution network? And then go follow up on that, and I'm going to throw it over to Deron. How do you think the transportation industry can help with that planning? Because as you said earlier, it's not one entity, it's multiple entities. So let's go back to Caroline, planning.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is going to and has already become more complicated. And I think starting with integrated resources planning that you mentioned, it is something that utilities have traditionally done for a long time, but the basis for the plans has to be something that we need to look at, right? So what are we planning towards? I think California is doing a good job in terms of getting the integrated energy IPER from the Energy Commission as the basis for what the utilities then use to plan their 10-year outlooks, so that there's the same view and understanding of where we're headed as a state of California. And we want to make sure that that continues to evolve and improve, because we do have a number of entities within the state of California that have responsibilities for the overall energy sector, from the Energy Commission to the independent system operator that manages the transmission system, which is so important to bring those large scale resources into California. And then of course the Public Utilities Commission, which oversees the utilities. So having them with a common view and leveraging the same set of goals and utilizing, I think, the CEC's, the Energy Commission's planning as the basis is something that we have started to do in California, and I think that makes a lot of sense going forward. In the distribution system, we have a separate effort underway at the Commission, distribution resources planning, and that is intended to look at not just the increases in utilization of electricity that we anticipate happening and where on the system, as well as what could be used to serve that load, right? So it doesn't all have to come from large scale resources coming through transmission into the distribution system, but how does rooftop solar or community solar and battery energy storage also help with local system reliability needs? And so system planning has become a little bit more complicated with the advancement of technologies and the advancement of the adoption of those technologies at the customer level. But it's also, I think, a great opportunity. And so our distribution system planners have really begun looking at those things a lot more closely and working with customers. And one of the things that particularly our large customers, we've asked them to make sure we're aware of their plans as they think about fleet electrification. The sooner we know about those plans, the better and easier it is to build those into our distribution plans to make sure that we can meet their needs on time and on schedule. And that's particularly important with larger fleets. Yes, large passenger vehicle fleets, but as well as transit fleets, the trucks that are leaving the Port of Long Beach and Port of LA. There's a lot of electrification effort underway in the state of California beyond the passenger vehicle adoption, and those can really have significant impacts on our system. And the sooner we know about plans for that electrification, the easier it is, like I said, for us to build those into our plans, seek the resources from the Utilities Commission to be able to meet the demands of our customers.
So Deron, do you think there's any way that the transportation industry, which you said, and we repeated it multiple times, it's not one utility, but multiple companies can help with this planning? Or is it going to be more of a, let's see what happens, and there's no centralized planning effort like the utility has? Because I think it could have a huge impact, especially given that the transportation sector and the electrification of buildings included in many studies are shown to increase the utility load by somewhere between 50 to 300%.
Yeah, so the good news is that under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there's new planning that's required of, especially of state departments of transportation, which are in a pivotal position. So they're required to come up with these national electric vehicle infrastructure plans, for example, which they've already filed, and those have already been approved. And under previous law, every state has to have a 20-year long-range plan for the transportation system. So those are going to have to change to accommodate additional electric vehicle infrastructure and charging infrastructure. And then there are 4-year state transportation improvement programs, which are even closer to actual projects moving. And those are going to have to change as well. There's also a new carbon reduction program, which is the first program of its kind in that law that requires every state to develop a carbon reduction strategy. So interestingly, with transportation, the bigger challenge may be how to make sure all these plans are aligned. And then this is where you need an all-of-government approach. So these laws really pass the baton on to federal agencies. That infrastructure law has the US DOT working overtime to implement all its provisions. And now the new Inflation Reduction Act does the same for DOE, the Department of Energy, and the IRS, right, to move a whole bunch of additional provisions. So these federal agencies are going to be coordinating with one another. And thankfully for electrification, there's already a joint office working between DOE and DOT. We need the same thing to happen quickly at the state level, and it has to include an entity that Caroline mentioned, the Public Utility Commissions, right, as part of that, right? And the good news is that some of that is already happening in some states more than others, and all of it needs to be accelerated in the coming 5 to 10 years, right, if we're to succeed and actually plan ahead, as you're saying, which is exactly what we need to be doing, right, so that the charging infrastructure keeps up with the fleet changes and the grid keeps up with all of it.
Yeah, and I'll just say for California, we have seen that happen. California has been at the electrification game for a while, so I think they've definitely set up their own processes. But recognizing that you're going to have this real floodgate of federal dollars coming to the state of California, I'll just give you one example. That, of course, as Deron just mentioned, you have federal dollars coming in from DOT, and those are going to go to the state Department of Transportation. Traditionally, the energy charging infrastructure dollars have come out of the Energy Commission. So they're very familiar. They've had a long program for putting out dollars from the state for charging infrastructure. And so they're working together. So rather than have a whole new team stood up at the California Department of Transportation, the CEC, the Energy Commission, California, will allocate those dollars, run the program, because they've done it in the past, and they can certainly implement federal requirements just as they've implemented state requirements. And so while the dollars will be sitting at DOT, California Department of Transportation, it'll be run through an existing program that the Energy Commission already has. And so staff that already know how to put out RFPs and get the applications in from different entities. So that's just one example of, let's leverage the talent that we have and the resources that we have, and not necessarily recreate the wheel just because the dollars are coming into a different agency than has traditionally been responsible for charging infrastructure in the past. So that's just, I would say that that's one example that other states don't necessarily have an energy commission, but it's just an example of how we can leverage those types of things. And certainly the Public Utilities Commission early on asked the utilities what they thought of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and how we might leverage those dollars to offset the costs of infrastructure investment, for example, or charging infrastructure, or those types of things that we may ask for. So what are the funds that we may go seek either at the federal level, because a third of the money is staying at the federal level, or dollars that we at the state level, because 2/3 of the dollars are flowing to states through formula grants. And there's a great opportunity, particularly in a state like California, which is going to get like $65 billion to go after that money to help offset the costs of investment that are going to be necessary in the electric system. So we're excited about that.
You mentioned how things are funneling through the state agencies. Earlier, you also mentioned that the state regulators, at least in California, that is regulating the utility, tends to only look at the electricity rates and not the overall energy costs for the average customers. Do you think that's going to change with all these movements, or is that still going to be siloed?
It's something that we're working on. And I should say, certainly the commission also regulates natural gas rates, water, so they have a number of entities that they regulate, but they don't regulate gasoline. And so we do see, as they think about affordability, and it's something that they are looking at, there's an active proceeding underway at the commission looking at affordability. And one of the things that we are encouraging is that they think about it in terms of energy share of wallet and not just the strict electricity bill or natural gas bill, but think about it from a broader perspective, because the customer doesn't think about it that way either. And so we need to help the customer also think about the fact that, yes, your electric bill may be going up, but it's to offset the use of gasoline, which in California has some of the highest prices in the country. Maybe I think the highest prices in the country at this time on gasoline. So if you can use less gasoline and charge your electric vehicle instead, you're going to save substantial dollars, because our electric rates in comparison are much less than the cost per gallon of gasoline equivalent.
So Deron, Caroline explained about California, but we know that there's a lot of traffic jam in California, and thereby the benefits of EVs are much larger than, let's say, in some rural state where you don't have urban areas and it's pretty much highways where people are driving at 80 miles an hour. How do you think the policy needs to be shaped for those states that don't have the same kind of congestive problems or the benefits that EVs will bring to the general populace in other states?
Oh, that's a really good question, and that's where a focus on heavy duty traffic might make more sense in terms of vehicle and electrification policies. I will say though that even in rural states, building out charging infrastructure on the interstates and on our highway system is, that's a big part of the challenge ahead. And for state transportation agencies, this is new. Actually planning for and then maintaining a charging infrastructure network across all the highways that we built across the country. And we have built a lot. We've got more than 4 million miles of roads crisscrossing the United States. Is a big challenge. And it's especially important that states get this right, because if charging is not something, and you're already seeing media accounts about this just this year, right? If chargers are out of order and you're not able to conveniently charge your EV when you're going on a long trip, especially in a rural state, then you're less likely to buy an EV, right? Or maybe you'll buy an EV and also a internal combustion engine vehicle that you take for long trips, and then we sort of defeated the purpose of encouraging the conversion over to electric vehicles. So I'm not sure how exactly, Bruce. I'm not answering your question directly because I'm not sure how the strategy, how much it varies in more urbanized versus rural states, but it's going to be different, right? And this is another challenge: is that every state has to plan differently, right, based on its development patterns and based on its fleet makeup and its population.
Okay, I'm gonna throw my last curveball to both of you guys, and this is because this session is for Asian Pacific Americans. So with all the discussions that we had, which was wonderful, and I thank both of you for it, what do you think the impacts are going to be for that specific demographics that we're targeting here?
I think Southern California Edison has one of the most diverse customer bases in the country, and the API population is the fastest growing in Southern California. So I think we see a real opportunity to engage customers about these opportunities and help them make these choices for electric vehicles, rooftop solar, battery energy storage, all these great things, including energy efficiency that Deron mentioned, because we really want to start with an efficient building envelope or the most efficient vehicle as people make these clean energy choices. So that's just one. I think the other for us is workforce development. We do see, we have a number of team members across our 13,000 employee base that are retirement eligible today. And it's really incumbent on us to make sure that we've got opportunities to bring in new and attract talent from across our service area. And so the API community is certainly one that we want to bring into to our company because it's really important for us to really represent the communities that we serve. And one area I'll just touch on is the line worker skilled trade. So while we generally across our service area have an employee base that represents and looks like the communities we serve, in the line worker skilled trade, we currently do not. So we are underrepresented in the API community there. So one of the things that we launched 2 years ago was a line worker skilled trade scholarship. And as we go into 2023, the first 2 years, we focused in on the African American and Black community because we're also underrepresented there as well. As we move into 2023, we're planning to expand the pool of candidates to the API community and women, as well as African American community, so that we can really go after all the areas in our community that are currently underrepresented in that area. So that's just another that we're really focused in on as well.
So you're going to use the opportunities provided by the IRA to expand your offerings and services and whatever else there is to different segments of the communities. Is that a good summary, or did I misrepresent what you try to say?
I think that's right.
Okay, Deron, one last to you, but in terms of transportation, it hits me like you look at the roads and you see the cars, you got the Toyotas, the Hondas, the Hyundais, it's largely Asian. And then you got the BMWs, the Mercedes, and then you got the Fords and the Chryslers. And so it's a mixture of Asian, American, and European. With that in mind, how do you think the IRA is going to help with the Asian Pacific American community in general? And also other communities as well, as Caroline suggested.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was going to add to some of what Caroline said. In terms of the question you just asked, it's worth remembering that there are going to be supply chain changes, right? There's manufacturer conversion tax credits in the IRA, and there's going to be effects up the supply chain where you're going to see new facilities built, facilities retrofitted, and some of those are going to be Asian owned, and it's going to provide employment opportunities to many, including Asian Pacific Islanders. In fact, number crunching about just the clean well, I'm actually shifting over from transportation to the clean electricity tax credits. I don't know if we crunched the numbers on the transportation jobs generated yet, but for just those clean electricity tax credits, we estimate about 350,000 additional high quality jobs created by 2035, right? So there's going to be workforce opportunities. And there's also going to be public health benefits due to pollution reduction, right? Because as we clean up the electricity sector, it's not just carbon emissions that are going to drop. It's what are called criteria pollutants that have health effects like ground level ozone, particulate matter, oxides of nitrogen, that kind of thing. And we're going to see thousands fewer preventable deaths and thousands fewer asthma attacks. And I guess the last thing I'd say is we're going to see improvements in housing, including affordable housing and multifamily affordable housing, which should benefit communities, including that of those where Asian and Pacific Islanders live. So there's going to be a lot of benefits to average consumers and to workers that will benefit both this population and generally a lot of other people in the United States.
Well, Caroline, Deron, I think we're out of time. Thank you both for your very, very insightful thoughts and very good conversation that we had. If you have last minute thoughts, throw it out. Otherwise, I think this will end the session for today. Again, thank you very much.